Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, June 5th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. I found myself this evening once again looking at the lightning data from blitzertongue.org, just kind of watching where these storms have kind of erupted. We know that we have the tail end of a rather weak Pacific jet that kind of keeps curling up over the western United States, and that was the one that kind of sparked a lot of the storms over California and throughout the Intermountain West. We've seen the tail end of the weaker subtropical jet coming through here, helping to initiate more storms and throughout parts of the plains. And as the farther you go to the north here, we just continue to see isolated convective events getting pretty far north, not only here into the Canadian Prairie, but up into the boreal forest as well. But just thinking about this, take a look here at the last 24 hours of total accumulated precipitation. As the map shows you here through 7 o'clock tonight, there was some locally very heavy rain out of some of these storms, and some of them have hit places that have been flooding. I'm thinking right down here in this part of the country in the southern plains, or pockets throughout the high plains getting up into Montana. But overall, what we need to be seeing in this pattern is a shift to more widespread precipitation events. And that's hard to come by in summer. Summer is just driven more by convection than it is by deep low pressure systems. But what we can get in terms of heavier precipitation is stalled out fronts. And stalled out fronts tend to produce overrunning, and it tends to produce quite a bit of precipitation. So I'm going to be looking for that. Unfortunately, to get stalled out fronts, you often have to have competing high pressure cells. And one of the most common types you can get this time of year is a big ridge of high pressure that sits here and a big ridge of high pressure that sits there. What that tends to do is put this whole area in between under the setup where there's just a lot of surface convergence and storms just erupting in this area. We do not have that. We don't have the big ridge that's sitting here over Montana. It's way over the north central plains of the United States, and there is no subtropical southeastern ridge to even speak of. So what we end up getting here is this pattern, and if we look at what's driving the flow, it's really the answer right here. I've taken you back to Quebec again, and throughout the day today we watched once again wildfires. And what you're getting out of this is flow out of the north. And that just tells you the direction across the whole of the East Coast that the atmosphere is going. And the only way it can go south here is if there's a big ridge to its west, and there's nothing it's pushing up against. And what I would want it to be pushing up against is a large southeastern United States ridge. That is a typical summer pattern, and we're not in that typical summer pattern right now. Now that smoke you can see from these wildfires, and this is just, it's crazy to see how much smoke is coming out of that. Just continues to degrade air quality across the eastern half of the United States. This is just a look through the next 24 hours here of vertically integrated smoke content. And you can see that stretching all the way from Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois through parts of the Mid-South over to the Carolinas and Virginia and then back up into New England. We've got just a lot of smoke in the atmosphere, and it's making things quite hazy in those areas. We also see here on our all hazards weather map all of these different areas that have air quality alerts. These are mostly kind of gathered around larger cities, but you can just continue to see that it's hitting a large portion of this population with very, very poor air quality. But that story comes back to this. This is what we're talking about. Here's the subtropical jet coming through. Here's the weak lows that keep coming through parts of California. And in the middle, just incredibly stagnant flow. And the flow that we have right here coming out of eastern Canada is just extremely dry. In fact, that air that's coming through there, we talked about this morning, it has dewpoint temperature values that, as you just watch here, watch the Great Lakes Basin into the eastern United States. This is getting through Wednesday, this is Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. The dewpoint temperatures here could be down into the teens in parts of the Great Lakes Basin. That is how dry this air is. That's the same kind of dryness you typically get here in parts of the Great Basin or the desert Southwest. That's more common in this section of the country. And so we just see that drier air plunging in here through Thursday, getting into Friday. And we're going to watch for fronts. There is a front coming through that's going to lift some moisture later on this weekend and into early next week, but there's a lot of dry and cool air that follows it by the time we get into Sunday. That gets us out there to the 13th, and the European model is the least aggressive on trying to bring back moisture into this area. Now, I know that we are deep in drought in areas that I'm kind of circling right into here. We're going to have more of a conversation about that in just a few seconds. But what we were trying to sniff out is anything to shove this pattern in a different direction, to stop getting these deep plunges of dry air, start to bring in better flow, and get storms to erupt. So let's have a quick talk about that. Next, the poleward and extended jet is still being forecast. That means instead of the jet doing this, it's coming up here. And we need it to do that. We need it to break out and start to move its way so that it can disrupt the weaker flow that's just occupied a big section. In fact, I should redraw that. It's more like right in through here. It's occupied that area with that large area of high pressure, stagnant air, and just really, well, you can see the flow comes around like that. That's what's delivering that northern flow that's coming through the East Coast right now. So what's been the catalyst for some change in the Pacific? Well, the MJO has finally left the Western Pacific. It's now resetting itself into phase 1, which is by Africa. It's going to move quickly through the Indian Ocean and come right back out here into phases 4 and 5. And this is kind of the catalyst for change we're expecting to see for much of the next 15 plus days. What I don't want to see is I don't want to see it come back to the Western Pacific. Now, that's hard to do. The MJO typically runs into the maritime continent and stalls. A lot of research has been done that found that 40% of the time that the forecast models want to sweep it on back to the Western Pacific, it never gets there. I need that to be right, and I'll show you why in a few minutes, but I don't want the MJO back into this area. So, as we look at it, take a look at what the jet stream level winds are going to do. Playing through the remainder of this week, there's the stagnant flow, there's the ridge, but here is the extended jet pushing through. There's the subtropical jet sneaking its way through the Baja into Mexico and eventually into Texas. This is by Saturday. Now by Saturday, that ridge is feeling the effect of what this extension of the jet is doing. There's almost a little bit of a wave break scenario here that's helping to retrograde this ridge back to the west. You can see it right there. So as we play through Saturday into Sunday, now we see things opening up in a much different configuration. And this is what I'm watching. 2 pieces of the subtropical jet. It is now a full 4 days later than I had originally hoped. So this is coming in midweek next week. And it's got the right stuff to possibly start to bring in better flow right over the top of this without having a massive ridge there. So these are ridge riders coming around a ridge over Texas and Mexico, born on the subtropical jet. But what the jet extension, I think, has done has disrupted the flow over North America, and we need that to continue. The other missing component to this, though, is right here. There is still no Bermuda high all the way out to June 15. If we could get a large area of high pressure to sit here, yes, that would start to deliver more moisture into the southeast. That would then deliver more moisture into the south and bring it up to the Midwest. It's got to sit over Bermuda. I don't want it over Nashville. I want it over Bermuda. But that would set up the catalyst for some change as well. But the farther out I play this, I see that the ensemble support continues to produce flow that's doing that. And that right there, that look, is what the atmosphere typically does when there's an El Niño. It also does that. That's in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so let me look at it a different way here. This is now the large ridge that's been practically immovable as of late. And what we're going to do is play out through Wednesday into Thursday and Friday this week. What we continue to see is that ridge holding onto the pattern. So more troughs coming into California, more storms, more flow out of the north and through here. That's the dry air and convergent air. And it's going to cool down across the eastern part of the United States. But what we're watching for is this. Here we go. That's June 13th, 14th, and 15th. Now this is totally different. Ridge comes up, subtropical comes in, and now watch this guy right here. And you start to see the beginning of getting the Bermuda high back. We need it back. This is why the pattern's starting to shape up better for mid-June. What the problem was is that for the last few weeks, we thought that would be here around the 8th, 9th, or 10th. And the reality of it is the pattern had more persistence in it than I originally thought. And now I think it's more closer to midweek next week that we start to see this shift to bring rains to those people that have not had rains. That's really what I'm specifically talking about here. So, newest model runs, let's compare them quickly here. This is the 12Z run on Monday from the WPC. You now see it starting to bring more storms into parts of the eastern Corn Belt, probably leaving the Great Lakes Basin and this section of the east driest longest. It's common for parts of the Columbia Basin to be drier, although we're watching for some weekend storms here, and this is very common this time of year for this region to be dry. Still, for most of this week, storms just line up right here. Let's compare this to the ECMWF. Now, as we just play this forward, this is going through Tuesday into Wednesday. You see the frontal boundary coming through, and even though the air behind it is so dry, there will be some storms and showers initiated in this part of the western Corn Belt. Still every day, storms pop here, and they're also still rolling over here in California, Nevada, and Idaho. Playing this out toward the end of the week, look at the Pacific Northwest. One low curls up, possibly delivering some storms here to Washington. I'm thinking a lot about maybe that cutting of hay that needs to be going on here. Watch late this week for storms to come into this area. And then as we go into the weekend, there's the front that tries to kick through the eastern Corn Belt. See it? Now that's this weekend. This is going through Saturday, Sunday. This is not going to give everybody a drink, but it is going to hit some extremely dry places in Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan. And then as we go forward through that, you'll see that the wettest conditions coming through midweek next week in the European model are south. They're following this trajectory. The big difference is, can I take you back 1 week? Let's just pause it right here at 1 week. There we go. There it is. And now I want to compare it to the to the GFS. Now we see some similarities, but look at how much more precipitation through Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and southern Michigan the GFS brings through by 1 week. Much different, much wetter. And that's why when you compare the differences, you see that once again, if you are in those states, you would want the GFS to win this. It's wetter to the south in the European model. Remember, these colors represent where the GFS is wetter by this many inches, and this is where the European is wetter by this many inches. The Euro, though, has a deeper low trying to set up here over the Great Lakes, which would deliver some rain to one of the driest places in North America right now compared to average. But I want to keep going with this. Let's go back to the GFS, and I'm going to show you what it continues to do. Now, if you watched my video this morning, I told you that once you get out there past 5 or 6 days, the forecast just run to run has tremendous variability. But today's 12Z and 18Z run just bring rain for nearly everybody that needs it, save Michigan. And that is the trouble spot, and that is a spot I'm very much concerned about going forward. So we got to continue to look at that. But remember, I've been showing you this for a while now. Let's come back to it. We noticed that for the last week or so, look at the skill score, 0.92 versus 0.87. That's the European versus the GFS. And the GFS really fell off while the Europeans kept a better skill score at matching the upper level height pattern. So I have to question the GFS and its ability to return this much rain into this area. I just got to watch it. I can't give it more credit than what's due based upon those skill scores. But I want to remind you that this is why we do ensemble analysis. The ensemble is designed, so where we run the model 51 different times in the case of the European, 31 different times in the case of the GFS, with different initial conditions to try to understand what that variability is and take it out of the equation. So the next 10 days, this is the probability, according to the European model, of getting an inch of total accumulated precipitation. Its wettest corridor is through here. See that? Now, it doesn't mean there won't be rain in this area or up into Michigan where they desperately need it. It just means that the European ensemble is farther to the south with that trajectory. Now, what is it farther to the south of? Let me show you the GFS ensemble. Look how much more rain the GFS is delivering to the Midwestern United States while leaving the Great Lakes drier. It is all about the difference in the size of the ridge that's going to be developing here. It's all about the difference in the speed of the jet stream that's coming into the United States. That's what the models are seeing differently. Now, I don't get to root for models, but I can pretend, and I want the GFS to win this because it is just giving more people rain. But we need to remember the differences in these models and what that could mean. Now, these are probability maps. Let's now just go look at anomaly maps. So this is the new week 2, so the 12th through the 19th precipitation anomalies from the European. It's driest here and drier there. Now I say drier, not dry, but drier, okay? Its wettest corridor stretches right in through here and into the Canadian prairie. Now, this is what the GFS ensemble is saying. It's got, again, a broader area of wetter conditions, and it's drier in the Cotton Belt. It's drier along the south. It's drier here. So we are still in this state of fluctuation overall. And our government, this is the CPC, released this today. This is their day 6 through 10 outlook, which will be the 11th through the 15th. They're following more of that ECMWF forecast, GFS forecast. And then their day 8 through 14 really kind of shows that same outlook from the European model. Okay? Forgive me. The GFS. They're really following the GFS. So from there, before I transition to longer term, can I tell you what's going on with the temperatures? 5-day sliding window of average temperature anomalies. Nothing really changed here. We see that as the ridge opens up and retreats temporarily through the Canadian Prairie and the Pacific Northwest, hot coming in here. But the cutoff lows to the south over California, the storms over the southern plains, and then the cooler air advecting out of the north knocks temperatures back here when you look at the time period between about the 8th and the 13th. Now, after this, what I will be watching for, this is day 5 through 10, so the 10th through the 15th. Look at this. If we do get the pattern to come in like this and open up some sort of ridge here, this heat's going to be juicy, and we're going to pop storms on this. And that is the top thing I'll be watching for in the near term. Now, we're going to transition to a longer term discussion. And the first thing I want to show you is this forecast. It was released on May the 8th. This is not current. This was May the 8th. But it was the forecast for the time period of May 8th through June 7th. And I want to show you how poorly the longer range models, especially the ECMWF, has been doing in certain regions. Because this was the forecast: wettest in southeastern Texas, wet through the plains, driest anchored basically right over Kansas City and the surrounding states, near normal precip through the Great Lakes, wetter than normal across the east, and dry in the Columbia Basin, along the I-5 corridor here, dry in Montana. Now this is what happened. So the model had this right, but missed the wettest being here. It had the driest air anchored right in this area, covering this region. Instead, it was there. It got this right, missed this, and it certainly didn't pick up on the really wet conditions we were expecting in the mid-Atlantic. I'm just showing you this so that you know that these longer range models have struggled with the transition, and what they've missed the most is the influence of El Niño. Even though it's developing, the MJO got stuck in phase 7 for too long, and the lack of the subtropical high called the Bermuda high. And there's even a problem when we look back and show you what the May forecast from the European seasonal forecast looked like for the month of May. So this is released in May for the month of May. It really missed this as well. Did not pick up in the wetter signal here, and didn't really get the pattern for Montana. Didn't really see very well what was happening in the mid-Atlantic to New England. So I need you to know that we are at a time right now that we are going to live model run to model run, and we're going to live ensemble package to ensemble package to see where the pattern's going to go. It is too much in a state of flux to use any of these long-range models as they currently stand. Now with that, I do want to show you at least what they're up to, and I'll give you a global view here of pressure. I am most concerned about the low pressure that is here and the low pressure that is there. Now remember, we do not typically get low pressure here when the PDO is dominating. This is not the right thing. This is just a very kind of wonky flow here overall. And what I see here is that by the time we get to the 3rd week of June, there are some indications of higher pressure building in this area and higher pressure building here. And that's an indication we'll see more low pressure in the midsection of the country and better chances for some storms. The Bermuda high seems to be regaining some control, but we also might just be washing out the signal toward the end of the month. That's going to be tricky to kind of pick up on what's going on there. I do want you to know that still, we'll come back to this in a second, we had this ocean temperature pattern where El Niño was building. We still have the colder water stretched into here. That's part of that negative PDO signal, but the warmth in the North Pacific is preventing this from being a full-blown negative PDO pattern. The issue is with all the warmth here in the Atlantic pressing all the way up toward Iceland. This is what has displaced the flow downstream of the United States and Canada and really moved around the position of the MJO, of the Bermuda high. But I've been thinking a lot about the MJO and how much it's just loved to live right here, while producing a lot of subsidence in this particular area. Let's come back to that thought in just a second, okay? First, I want to show you how much the ocean temperature has been warming right here as of late. They're currently sitting at 0.759 C above average. This is a dramatic increase in ocean temperatures. We are barreling forward, and the forecast right now is suggesting that even if you took the middle of the longer range ensemble forecast, we should get up there around 2 degrees Celsius by the time we get into our late summer, early fall time period. So El Niño is still there, and El Niño will likely take over. We are just waiting to see when it fully does it. We're going to get a taste of that after the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. Will it continue to keep its grip in July and August? And what I mean by that is, will we get this? If El Nino was the strongest factor right now, June to August, everywhere that you see the warmer colors would be wetter than normal. That's just the correlation. We would expect drier in the Carolinas, no southwestern monsoon hitting Arizona, and a little bit drier here in the Pacific Northwest. But normally, this is a very stormy pattern for a large section of the United States if El Nino takes over and gets its full grip on things. My concern right now, though, is this. The MJO has come back into phase 3. That sits right there, okay? But it's expected to transition maybe back over into phases 7 and 8. Now, as it makes this transition, we may not feel the effects of this until the end of the month of June, even though it's happening here in the middle of June. There's usually a lag on how this responds. But if that occurs, what I'm concerned about is this. In June, if you have El Nino and you go back to MJO phase 8, it takes us right back into the omega pattern that got us into trouble. So I'm not yet fully convinced that we're going to be able to break away and cure the drought area, even though there's some near-term help coming, as we've seen in the models. I just want you to know the risk isn't off the table just yet. So from here, I want to show you what these new long-range models are suggesting. The European was initialized dry, and it has stayed drier. This is its forecast for the United States from June 15th to July 15th. Now remember, I told you that it did not perform well in the month of May. It did not pick up on the right signals. And we certainly are not yet ready to rest all of our hope on what the European model is suggesting here. I want to compare this to what the current outlook is from the newest forecast from the CFSV2. June 19th to June 25th continues to be stormy into this area in the model. It's been very consistent with that. And then it's got the 26th to July 2nd continuing to be very stormy. This is exactly what I'd expect to see if El Nino begins to fully take charge of this pattern. And there are some indications that it could. Notice in the ocean temperature forecast, and the new long-range forecast says by July into August, we're expecting ocean temperatures here to be maybe 2 to 3 degrees C above average across a broad section. This is like Niño region 1 and 2 and 3 right in through here. And then as we go forward into our hurricane season, which remember all of the hurricane forecasts have trended up. They've trended more active as of late. This is September and October. They still have the very warm water here, a fading PDO signal, and warm water showing up there. So which means the models are still quite aggressive on this being the end case for what the Pacific Ocean is going to be doing. But I want to show you this. Let's come back and let's go to precipitation. Let's go to seasonal, and we're going to go to the United States. And right now, that July, August, September forecast is not overly wet for this area. It's got the weak southwestern monsoon. But I want to tell you something. I'm going to put a question mark on this so you don't forget it. When the models initialize dry, it has a hard time breaking away from it. And I don't want you to look at this and assume that this is what's going to happen. It's just one simulation. And I think it's simply due to the biases in the initialization that it continues to look like this. This model for months gave a wet signal for a broader section of the United States. And throughout the remainder of the month of June, we'll get new updates, about one a week from all of the major models, and we're going to continue to add it to this discussion. It's not lost to me that I'm in our nation's capital today, and I'm excited tomorrow that I get to testify before a subcommittee at Congress about NOAA. I'm excited to just promote NOAA in every way I possibly can. But given that it is June 5th, my mind always just goes back to this event right here. I know it's a small picture. Let me try to blow it up for you. But this is Group Captain James Stagg. He is with the Royal Air Force, and that is Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this is a conversation between these two men back in 1944, where James Stagg is presenting a weather forecast, and the weather forecast was for the D-Day invasion. The tide was right between the 5th and the 7th, and there was a choice to go on the 5th. But given limited information, James Stagg told Eisenhower that if we went on the 5th, we'd be fighting too much of the weather in addition to the Axis powers. So he says we need to wait. There's going to be an opening that's going to happen on the 6th. The man did this with very limited information, a few ship reports and a few observations across Europe, some weather balloon launches, and he made the forecast. And it is arguably one of the most successful forecasts in world history. And one of my favorite quotes from this whole thing is when Dwight D. Eisenhower, said about the difference between the sides of the war is that we had better meteorologists. And I love that quote. And I'm excited to kind of continue this legacy of this guy right here. So I thought I'd share that with you tonight. Have a good rest of your week. We'll talk again tomorrow morning. Thanks.